or the talk right now. But more than welcome to take it away. We're so excited to hear a little bit more about your exhibition.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Adina, the curator for this exhibition. It has been such a pleasure working with the artists Haerim and Yasmin Spiro this past year to watch them grow and develop new work and discuss with them the intimacy of their work, their insights on place and belonging. I'm really grateful to have worked with Haerim and Yasmin and for being wonderful right off the bat, being a part of this project. My dog is moving around my apartment as I speak, so sometimes things will fall. Yasmin and Haerim, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Yasmin Spiro, an artist. I met Rim and I met through the Hatch program a couple years ago. I don't remember, were we 2017, 2018, Rim? I don't even remember.
Yeah, we were.
Okay. Yes, okay. And I'm an artist. I've been in Chicago about 7 years. I'm originally from Jamaica. I grew up there and I lived in New York for a while before I moved to Chicago. Yeah, I'll let Rim introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Haerim. You can call me by Rim. I'm originally from South Korea. I've been here also almost 7 years in Chicago. And I guess I met through Yasmin, yeah, again, CAC Hatch program. But we also did Port of Call group
that's true.
Right, in 2018 at Chicago Art Department. So through that experience, I, had a chance to learn her more, practice and know each other. And it's a really great experience that we can, exchange contact information. So that was a really great, space that we can be together.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we have some slides that we'll share today to kind of walk you through the work as you would see it in this space. So I'll pull those up. All right. So right as we walk in, we see a mix of Haerim and Yasmin's work. So Haerim's on the right, the framed painting, and then we have some of Yasmin's sculptures. And all throughout the gallery, Haerim and Yasmin have made a point to have their work very intermingling. We have some close-ups here of the weaving and of this painting. And I was wondering if you would like to share how you saw your work intersecting with each other, and maybe how that insight might have changed over the course of the year that you've been making work and constantly checking in with each other.
You want to start, Rim?
Yeah, I can start. So I would like to share this whole exhibition process first, so that how curate and make this happen together. So I think because of the pandemic, it took a little bit longer than we thought to have an exhibition. So that was a very interesting experience for all of us, to how to like communicate each other, how to develop this exhibition together. But I would really want to emphasize that I feel very grateful to work with Yasmin and Adina, and especially I wanted to say that Adina really put a lot of effort to facilitate every 2 weeks meeting, so that we can like brainstorm together through the Zoom meeting every Friday. And yeah, I think that was a really fruitful time for all of us to, you know, have a healthy conversation. But I also wanted to say that, you know, part of my practice is like sharing knowledge and sharing experience to building trust together. So I think like, especially Yasmin, she was really supportive to develop my new practice and sharing her personal experience in Jamaica and also living in Chicago. We also found a lot of commonality and interest that because we were both living in Southside Chicago. So I guess that was that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think you know, we started that kind of early on, that I mean, I think we had some initial meetings and we found that it was helpful. And I think we realized we probably had a lot more to talk about than we initially thought, sort of, or to talk through the ideas and the things we were thinking about. And I think it was really helpful that we had this like Friday afternoon, like bi-weekly standing meeting. It really helped me. And I think I learned more about your process too, Rem, through doing that. Because even though we're in Hatch, it's like so busy when you're having those conversations, you don't always get like a full sense of someone else's practice. So I learned more about your teaching and, you know, how that sort of intersected with your work also. And yeah, and both living on the South Side. And I think, you know, I think we talked through a lot of things like formal influences, like aesthetic, you know, sort of spaces that had influenced us or experiences, and then also just our personal like cultural experiences and maybe like a sense of otherness, I think. And so I think it helped us think about the places where there were intersections with the work, I think. And Adina was great at keeping us on task.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. So in this image, we have Yasmin's work kind of bookmarking, and we have Haerim's scrape pieces in the center. We have some artist book that Haerim made, and some more paintings above it. So the title of the exhibition, Autoethnography, we've been getting a lot of questions about that. It's basically a form of research in which the author uses self-reflection and personal experiences to connect their own narrative with a wider cultural, political, social meaning. And both of our artists here today are international artists who are based in the South Side of Chicago, and that brings a very unique perspective to their work that is dealing with both an intimate notion of identity as well as the sort of broader socio-political exploration of identity and belonging. So I wonder if you would both like to speak about what that has meant in your practice and what it has meant to be collaborating and intersecting work with each other, knowing that about each other.
Yasmin, would you like to try first this time?
Sure. I think, you know, my background, where I was born and grew up, and my family's history has a lot to do with, I guess, the way I see the world and the things I think about, and then, you know, the work that I make. So I was born and grew up in Jamaica, but my parents are not Jamaican, but I feel very Jamaican. People often will question, because my background is very mixed, but Jamaica is so much my home, and like the physical and cultural landscape of the country has a lot to do with the way I see the world and the things that influence my work aesthetically also. I'm I think I've realized as I've gotten older how much I've been influenced by like the craft and culture scene in Jamaica. My mother was an artist or is an artist, and my father's an architect. And we grew up around a lot of artists in Jamaica, and there's like an incredible history of craft there. But in terms of like the autoethnography, I also think a lot about sort of the immigrant experience. So my parents moved to Jamaica in the 60s. My dad is Israeli and had left Israel to go to New York to study architecture and urban planning. My mother grew up in the States, but her parents were immigrants from Yugoslavia, from Croatia. They're Croatian. And my father's family was from Europe, and they moved to Israel during the Holocaust. They fled. And so just the history of like people moving within my family and how you form identity, or what you attach your identity to, is something I think about a lot. I don't think the work is about identity as much as it is about sort of mining or an archive of all this information. So the Zugalum piece is like something that I'm interested in architecture. It's a big influence on my work, but it's this vernacular architecture that exists in Harran, Turkey. And it's this interesting space because it's this place that it's now Turkey, but it was Syria and Iraq, and it has been like a trading outpost for thousands of years. And these structures, they've been making them for like 3,000 years. And I guess they were initially built to keep things cold, almost like a giant refrigerator. You know, this brick with the layer of mud on the outside. And I use that image so you could see the inside, because it's sort of interesting to see the stacking. And I think it's just interesting. They still make these sorts of formal structures, and it connects to an interest I have in weaving in my work. And then through these conversations with Rim, we were talking about weaving, and she does this kind of scraping in her work, and sort of the intersection of like the formally like the weaving and the scraping, and then the influence of architecture and space. And so I'm rambling, so I'm gonna let you talk now.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your work, Yasmin. Yeah, so because this exhibition is autoethnography, I think we're unfolding a lot of personal history, but then also we're really investigating an interest of the culture and the place. So in terms of my practice and the work that I'm showing at Heaven Gallery is like mainly the body of work of whitewash, where I'm examining particular site in Cabrini Green neighborhood. Unlike Yasmin's work, I think my work is a little bit more particular and talking about a specific site and in this building. So this mural is whitewashed in 2015, and this mural, All of Mankind, painted by Bill Walker, belongs to Cabrini Green neighborhood. But then, unfortunately, because of all of the community had to push out because of the, development and demolishment. Unfortunately, this church, even though the church is still there, the mural itself is whitewashed. I was a little bit close to live that Cabrini Green neighborhood back then, and I had a chance to go to the site because I was very much interested in the history of Cabrini Green neighborhood. People ask me a lot why you're interested in this history or this neighborhood, although you're not from this community. I guess that's really critical question to expand more of my practice, because even though I'm not from this community, I think I'm thinking about, you know, like transformation of site, transformation of urban space, where, you know, I'm growing up, I living in Seoul in South Korea. I saw so many, you know, space were transforming all the time, because South Korea is very teeny tiny country where we don't have large land or space, so that we have to, like, you know, redevelop uh, a lot of spaces and rebuild you know, high-rise building. So that really reminds me this Cabrini Green neighborhood. But again, when I'm looking this mural, there's a lot of social political implication of whitewashing, because this mural like represent unity of race and gender, which depicts like Gandhi, Anne Frank, Jesus, Dr. King. Their four figures are interlock each other, you know, transcending this unity of race and gender. And reflecting this political, you know, incident happening 1970s and 60s. I think that's really great, you know, mural that I can learn racial diversity as well as the social political background of Chicago. But then it unfortunately whitewashed. And that also made me think about what is the meaning of this, you know, erasing history, and who is writing, who has authority to write down this history. So it made me think about a lot of this inscription of history. So yeah, so I guess, and then this image is from Chicago Public Art Group. I started to, you know, research a lot about this mural and start to meet people and interview people. And luckily, you know, Chicago Public Art Group really opened up to share this photo archive with me. So there's another image next. Yeah, these are all from Chicago Public Art Group. They share this original photograph. They just translate to the digital archive so that they can share with me. And this was a part of, it's a great like access point that I can understand the community.
So from here, I was wondering if we could talk a bit more about materiality and methods. So now that we have the background about the series that you're producing, the architectural places that have inspired you, Yasmin, you started mentioning a bit about the process of scraping and of weaving. And I was wondering if you wanted to elaborate more on that and on kind of your idea about weaving being kind of an original form of architecture was something we had talked about that I would love to hear you elaborate on. Oh, you're muted, by the way.
I feel like everybody has to do that at least once during this. You know, I'm not, I don't know if I consider myself a fiber artist. I've just been working with textiles for a long time. I think I did as a kid also, and maybe it just sort of carried over into my work as I got older. But the weaving, I started doing these smaller pieces a couple years ago, maybe about 6 years ago. I started this series called Safety Series. I had been gifted a couple bolts of this like really incredible wool felt by a friend that was leaving Chicago. And I made this, the first piece I made, which is actually the large piece behind me called Safety Wall. And it's not really weaving as it is sort of an architectural weaving, but I had also been looking at weaving from my history in Jamaica. There's a history of weaving and craft and wicker weaving there. And when I was a kid, my parents had a family friend. He was a Rasta in Jamaica who was a weaver, and my father had helped him find some land to develop this property on that became his place in outside of this town called Utrecht called Lion's Den, and he made wicker furniture and he wove, and his whole family, they were all weavers. And we would go there after the beach on the weekend, and it was entire space was woven, like the walls were woven, and then the table was woven out to the wall, and the lamps were woven. And he was this very like kind of spiritual guru guy, and I think the physicality of that space and the way he like lived through making, and he wasn't someone who considered himself an artist in any kind of Western formal sense. But I started kind of investigating his work, and eventually I found a book on Rastafarian art that had documented some of it, because the space doesn't exist anymore because he died, I think, in the mid or early 90s. And so I was sort of hunting down these images of this space that I had this memory of. And at the same time, I started doing research on weaving, and the idea that weaving is sort of, or the overlapping of forms is sort of like the early architecture, and that female weavers were early architects, thinking of like baskets, then turning into walls, then turning into larger structures, and how you can expand scale. So that's sort of on a formal sense. And then, it's just sort of this archive. And then when I'm making pieces in the studio, sometimes I have a literal sense of exactly what I'm going to make. And sometimes it's through material exploration of, investigating different types of weaving. So in this case, I'm using the wood and the felt together and staining the wood. And if you get close up on the pieces themselves, you can see there's this weird bulge. And so the weaving also starts to like reference body parts, or it looks like kind of shifts in the body, or like the crease of your elbow, or just the strangeness of our bodies. And so I think through the formal making, it's partly me, my body making it, and then thinking about architecture and structure. And for these pieces, I made them in the last year, and I called them sensitive fences, but just thinking about, I don't know, just all the challenges we've all been facing. And then also thinking about immigration. For these, I was also thinking about like the hierarchy of immigration and the ability to move within space. I think we were probably all sorts of traumatized by the things that have happened at borders in the last couple of years, and just the history of, I guess, the history of colonialism and racism, how that's perpetuated through the ways that people are allowed to move across borders, or why borders exist. So it's not always a literal translation in the work, but it's the things I think about, and kind of the research I do as I'm making the work, and then I kind of get lost in the process in the studio. But I think of it as like an archive of information, and then like feeds into the making of the work. But I have been thinking a lot about like what that hierarchy is, and what allows you or gives you access to space and places, and the ability to travel. And particularly growing up in Jamaica, where if you didn't have a visa, you couldn't leave the country, and thinking about how that sort of perpetuates colonial practices. Yeah.
We've also mentioned in our discussions this sort of unique interaction of weaving with felt in particular, which doesn't have a weave. Mm-hmm. Would you like to talk a little bit more about felt as a choice that keeps showing up in your work, and like how felt is made, why that's important to you?
Yeah, I think, felt, I used, when I was first started in art school, I was a printmaker, and I was a printmaker for a long time. And I did a printmaking residency in New York. You use felt in the printing presses, and felt's used in industrial processes. It's like, you know, when two metal parts are interacting with each other and you need a buffer, there's often like a felt ring, or, you know, and it's something that absorbs sort of metaphorically and literally absorbs pressure and impact. And then felt itself is one of the oldest fabrics because it's not made through warp and weave, it's made just through the compression of fibers. So something interesting about that. So when you cut it, it has like an architectural feel. It doesn't, you know, you don't see, like if you, most fabrics, if you cut them, you'll see the edge, you'll see the thread, and that sort of line. And felt is sort of like a distinct other being of textile because it is just made differently, I think. And also reference, you think about like things like, you know, also like Joseph Beuys or Robert Morris and artists that have like historically worked with felt, and also like felt as like army blankets or something that's like, it has this density and warmth, and it almost feels a little bit like an animal hide sort of.
Thank you. Here's some more examples of sensitive fences. Here's Haerim's artist book, or one of many. Haerim, I would love to hear about your process of collecting materials, and while we are on the image of the artist book, you know, what brought you to take this process of painting that is so textural, where you've been using sands and using actual scrapes from the wall itself. What brought you then to create this artist book?
Sure. Yeah, I think I would like to say I wanted to talk about the artist book first. So this artist book practice is pretty recent that I'm trying to develop more. And it's really great to show to the audience in a physical space, I guess. But I think that because the painting is very abstract, and I also started to make some weaving painting and show some weaving painting in this exhibition. And it's very abstract, so I think that I need some more information to telling this particular story. And I think that also showing my personal archive with the archive from the CPHE is very important as an evidence and as just ethnographical research. Because I also do a lot of photography, I actively use my photograph as a material to make artist book. Yeah, also this one, I wanted to talk about the scraping and the scrapes that I collect. So not only I meet the community with CPHE, I visit a site many times, and you know, it's really interesting experience to go there, because even though it whitewashed, the building itself seems like very monumental, and the trace of the mural it still remains. And then one day I discovered that somebody tried to scrape and see the underneath of the original mural. There's I think like 4 portion of it that you can slightly see the original mural. So that was very interesting. It was very deliberate, and it's a 4 square shapes that you can see different images. So I also wanted to try to see underneath and get rid of this whitewash part of the layer. But then it was really hard to do it. And then there were only a chunk of the layers of the paint came out from the surface of the building. So I started to collect that. I don't know why, but I felt that I need this to keep it because I actually met the previous owner of that building, and she said that she's gonna sell this building soon and it's gonna demolish soon. So maybe because of that, I thought that maybe I need to, you know, collect this mural, even though I cannot see the underneath. And also when I visit the site, I also start to collect some sand of it. So try to really like incorporate with into my painting. So I mix with sand, with acrylic paint or oil paint and apply on the top of the canvas or on the top of the weaving. Adina, would you mind to show another slide? Yeah, this is another artist book. Yeah, so the bottom part of this painting is like a scrape that I collect from the mural. And the upper side is I mix with acrylic paint and sand and try to create a very like, architectural surface. So even though like, you know, my work is very abstract and it became very abstracted, I wanted to say that I'm not really interested in like corresponding or responding with this history of abstract art. I guess I'm more I'm confronting the history of canon of abstract art, I would like to say. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
And I know that you ended up using a mixture of sand collected and then some more like ready to buy sand. So what does it mean to, I guess this question is really for both of you. I think both of you have sort of balanced materials that are sort of found or given and just sort of like collected, and then some other materials that are just more easily accessible. So what does it mean for you and your practice to be sourcing materials in a certain way?
Yeah, I think you know, materials is really important to address, you know, and also that give an implication of what you wanted to say. Like Yasmin works, you know, she is using a lot of felt, and felt also give an implication of her Jamaican experience, and also the scrape and sand is also experience that, you know, where I visit, it's kind of like a evidence that what I witnessed, where I was, where I visit. So I think that, you know, it's directly not represent that, oh, you know, the body itself, but I think that it can be an indexicality of the body or presence of the body. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you know, I materially I still do I work a lot with burlap, although there isn't any in this show. And I started doing that many years ago and casting with it because it was a material that I grew up around on the farm that I grew up on, and then it's just used in Jamaica to like package coffee, and it's used in landscaping, and it's biodegradable. So it has this like considered to be this sort of base material, but there's something viscerally about it. Just even like the smell, like my old studio mates used to say that my studio smelled like a barn. And I think because I had like bolts and bolts of like this this different types of burlap. I use a lot of this burlap called erosion cloth. That's actually used, it has like a wide weave, and it references actually a lot of these works, but it's used to sort of wrap mountain sides, like when they're terracing land. And then it was used on plantations for like packaging agricultural goods. And so I think with material, I often choose material like in some of the pieces, like if you go back a little, there's the ceramics, and started integrating ceramics into my work through a residency I did at Kohler. And but I've always worked a little bit with it. In Jamaica, I worked for a ceramic artist for a couple of years when I was younger, and teaching kids. And again, kind of to what Rem was referencing, it has this like connection to the body, but also the connection to the earth, and felt feels like that also, that kind of hide quality, or like animal, land, nature. And I think, you know, there is an index to it, and there is a kind of a sense of like choosing materials that don't have a certain kind of preciousness, and investigating, transforming the material through experimentation, through research and reference. And so, yeah. These pieces in particular, the ceramics are slip cast glaze, and they're from a series that was sort of inspired by this feminist dystopian novel. They're about feminine references in architecture. So they're sort of these pleated cast forms that they look both like body and then like buildings and structures. And I was at the time I was making them, I was doing this residency, and I was rereading this book called The Edge of Time by Marge Piercy. That's a 70s, sort of a feminist dystopian novel. These like main characters that you don't know if they're real or she's hallucinating them. And she recreates a scenario where the world is basically ruled by women. So these pieces, Matapois, that were, you know, all the names of these pieces reference that book, and she's just a really interesting character, and I kind of like went down the rabbit hole of investigating her history as sort of a feminist, and then she's this like incredibly resilient person that had survived a lot of crazy things. She grew up in Detroit. And so in making these, I was thinking about the body, but then also making these felt pieces that reference to the soft material becomes hard material, that references the hard material again. And so it becomes this sort of interconnectedness, even though they're very different materials.
And on the subject of the relationship of the body of the viewer with the artwork, I'm also curious. I don't want to spend too much time on kind of how things had to change due to COVID. But Yasmin in particular, your Zugalum, so traditionally when you have been making these sort of hanging dome-like structures, these sculptures, you've been able to have the viewer stand inside, and there's been like a multisensory experience. So what has it meant to you in the process of making these sort of forms to have to rethink that dynamic with the body of the viewer?
Yeah, I mean, the earlier ones that I made, I actually showed them at CAC. They were called Here, Here, and Here, and there are these two domes. One had a sound dome in it. I had made a loop of sound that I recorded in Jamaica. It was the crows on my parents' farm, the sound of my feet walking on the farm, and then it's like 2,000 feet up in the hills, and so there's a limestone quarry nearby, and the trucks go up the hill. And in Jamaica, the roads are like this narrow, so the trucks just lean on their horns going all the way up the hill, and you basically have to drive off the side of the road to avoid the trucks. But the sound of the horns creates this weird echo, and so some of it has to do with just always missing home. And so when I call my mom, I can always hear the crows in the background, or I can hear the trucks moving up the hill. And sometimes she's walking around on the farm. So I became interested in these sensory memories and how these sorts of isolate a place for you and can like kind of take you back. And then the other piece had peppermint oil, because my parents' farm is a peppermint farm. And so when I made the pieces, people would go up and inside them. And so making this piece, I knew that nobody could touch it. And so I had wanted it to be this big structure that like a couple of people could be under together. And so I experimented with hanging it in my studio, and I kept lowering it till it was at this place where it felt like it was sort of collapsed in on itself. But yeah, I mean, maybe when things change, I tend to cannibalize my own work and rehang it differently every time. So I don't know if I'll hang it this way again. So we'll see.
Sorry, I was being distracting. Yeah, I also like that you had a special helper when it comes to weaving partially on the ground.
Oh yeah, my daughter, you mean? Yeah, I put her to work in my studio.
So I thought we could talk as it's now 12:47. I would love to close out by just hearing more about what you've both learned from each other, what has come out of this process of communicating and working not collaboratively within the studio, but the way that you've been working, focusing on how your work intersects, focusing on wanting to both make new work with each other's work in mind. What has really been generative about that process?
I would like to say that, it was an incredibly productive time working together. Especially to me, I guess I influenced a lot of the idea of like weaving from Yasmin, and how the weaving history is tied to architecture. I was also like, at that time I was doing, while I'm teaching kids, I was teaching a lot of like weaving skills so that I could also embrace and translate into my practice. But I also wanted to say that, doing a two-person show is really incredible. That it's almost like a teamwork. It was like almost like a collaboration, and corresponding and responding or respecting together. So it was like felt so different than other group show.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. I think as much as I like making the work and doing the show, I also really just liked our meetings and the conversations. I feel like that's so much a part of it, that you would tell stories about teaching and about the spaces that were influencing you. And I think I learned a lot about Adina too. We all learned a lot about each other, and it was sort of this nice, because it was such a strange year, it was this nice constant thing that we had, where we would connect and share. And I agree. And as we went along, I started to see more points of connectedness than before. And it's funny, even just doing, I was telling Rim, even just doing the presentation, Rim's photograph of the sort of the white domed shape, and then she pulled the reference material, and then I pulled the reference material for the Zugalum thing, and I was like, there's all this overlapping similarity that we probably all shared this imagery throughout, but sort of seeing it kind of reduce this presentation made me see other points of weaving or connectedness. And yeah, it was a really nice process. And I love seeing it all together. And I so appreciate both of you for being a part of this and us all doing it together.
I also wanted to say that I'm really interested in collective voice to make together. Like the idea of polyvocality, I think is very powerful tool. And I think in a way that this exhibition reflects the idea of polyvocality, that, the woman of color, addressing the identity of women of color, and, raising positionality, responding a place and space.
Yasmin, you have a question about your Xanadu pieces, which were a very exciting surprise kind of on the day of installation. So I would love to, I would also love to hear you talk more about them. Yes.
Yeah, so, my dad is an architect and urban planner. And as a kid, I spent a lot of time at his office after school. And I've stolen most of his books at this point, slowly over time, but this incredible library of architectural reference books. And he studied urban planning and architecture in the 60s, and it was during sort of the heyday of like Buckminster Fuller and these ideas of futuristic cities and like the city as organism, and the idea that you can start over, like build a new city, like, okay, this isn't working, we're gonna start over. And so Xanadu was this sort of like prototype for this like futuristic house that both looked like it was, built from the earth. It was like these dome surfaces and like holes and hallways and like interestingly lit and like sort of influenced by like Corbusier. And but then on the inside, it was supposed to have all this technology where it just did things for itself, this automation. And so this weird idea of this like perfect space. And I guess I was just sort of interested in like that impulse to like recreate or try again. And so it had me thinking about like why my dad is even interested in urban planning. And maybe, if I was to psychoanalyze everything, which I tend to do anyway, that his family fled to Israel to sort of start over. He left to start over. My grandparents left to start over. And what does it mean? And so these pieces, they're cast from different things. The metal pieces are architectural samples that I had gotten from this place called Material for the Arts in New York. And then some of the pieces are cast from like metal duct work from Home Depot, like industrial things. And then I braided these ropes and cast them into the pieces. And then on the top of both of the Xanadu pieces are these slumped pieces I made at Kohler with leftover slip, just kind of slumping them in bags. And they were kind of like the leftover, the extra, but I was interested in just the process of making these, because everything I was doing there was so controlled by these big molds that I had to pour the slip into and then pour them out. And the process was so structured that I sort of at some point wanted to make something where I couldn't control it. And so I just dumped the slip in these bags and like let them, it took them days. There's these heavy chunks of porcelain to just really let more air in every day. And then they dried over time and they each became their own little beings. And then for this piece, I incorporated the felt that sort of mimics the shape of the piece. But yeah, that's a long story for those pieces.
I always love your long stories. They're fascinating, and your influences are always fascinating. If anybody else has questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. Here's another piece that I was really excited to see come out of this process of you two communicating, where Haerim, you started playing with the aesthetic of weaving as well. So this has the sand that you collected, and it also has like this texture that has to do with scraping and excavation, but then it has this weaving. So do you want to talk about it?
Oh yeah. So long story short, I also wanted to bring it up a little bit more about the history of architecture, because while we're doing a meeting, we've been talking about Le Corbusier's Radiant City, and I was like brainstorming how, you know, to create a weaving pieces by using this photo archive together. And then I had a couple of studies, and when I started to translate to the large piece, I felt that it's not really necessary to, you know, use a, you know, photo reference into the weaving. Rather just do a photo arc. I mean, an artist make an artist book would be more, you know, effective to deliver my idea. So, so I think it became more abstraction instead of like this history of this urban planning, because I think the Le Corbusier Radiant City is very fascinating to me, because a lot of this urban planning idea is migrate into different cities, but in the United States, it became a public housing project and it demolished and whitewashed. So I think that's, I think the collecting materials and applying to the canvas was more important than, you know, like providing actual reference of Radiant City photo archive.
So that is the end of our slides for this exhibition, Autoethnography. Gosh, Odin. Closing thoughts. One thing I just want to reiterate is how much I have appreciated working with the two of you, learning from you, learning about you. If there are any last thoughts that you have about your work, about this process that you would like to share, that would be the moment. And also just sharing gratitude, major gratitude to Heaven Gallery for supporting us, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alma and Francine. Thank you, Adina and Rim. It's been really great. I'm looking forward to the rest of the show. And
yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. And the exhibition's extended by May 4th, right?
mm-hmm.
So if you have any chance to stop by, feel free to, you know, come by to the gallery. It'd be awesome.
Yes, we're open today. We're open today, 1 to 6, tomorrow, 1 to 5. Stop by. It's beautiful. I'll give you a personal tour. Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful talk. I learned so many things about the exhibit, and I can't wait to share them with the people who visit, because I feel like that makes it so much more special to them when you give them the context and the reasoning behind the work. Then it just makes it so much more meaningful. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy this beautiful day.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.